Welcome to the Point News interviews. Today is good to have Luca Marini, the founder of Alpha Community. Hello, Luca.
Hello, Daria. Hello, everyone.
How are you?
I'm fine. I'm very happy to be back with you because I really appreciate the efforts that Points News is doing, creating amazing and super interesting contents.
Thank you. Today, let's discuss social inequality and other questions, of course. Is it feasible to resolve this issue, this social inequality?
Well, it's an amazing topic. Huge. What can we say? Maybe we can say that in the current situation, governments are not motivated at all by putting human life and dignity as a central value. Besides the claims they make, we can easily see that their priorities are different. For example, economic wealth for a minority of people, or nationalistic dreams and deliriums, or violent religious impositions, or maybe sometimes public debt towards regional central banks, protecting the interest of multinationals and corporations, or even exporting Western democracy and so on. So they have every type of concern, but human dignity and quality of life. So in none of these cases, we can see examples of real progress that improves life conditions for all human beings. This is pretty clear to see. And we can say that the model of development of Western societies, especially since it has become a global model after the fall of the Soviet Union, is implicitly built on the logic of privilege. It's a fact that this model doesn't produce an overflow of richness towards the majority of society. And on the contrary, we could observe over decades that it results in the accumulation of wealth and power in the hands of a very small minority. And still, the so-called democracies are claiming that wealth for all is their mission. That's such an hypocrisy, terrible hypocrisy, because social equality is clearly not their priority. And even if it was so, imagine if every single human being on the planet, 8 billion people, had access to the consumerist and materialistic lifestyle that is promoted by the economic powers and social media. Imagine that, 8 billion people. That would simply be impossible and unsustainable for the planet, which is already on the verge of the point of no return in terms of pollution, global warming, exploitation of resources, you name it. So it's clear that those billions of people who are desperately trying to achieve a more wealthy lifestyle will never be able to achieve it, simply for the fact that the current model of development is not sustainable if provided to all human beings.
So your point is that social inequality is necessary in the world?
No, with this type of model of development. That's what I'm saying, because it's based on privilege. So the only way actually to try to overcome social injustice and inequality is resetting the parameters that regulate political and economical choices, and finally outlining a sustainable type of economy and lifestyle that can provide the basics of a decent life in terms of public education, health system, and environmental sustainability. So, of course, one might think that this is impossible. How can you give this to all people? I don't think it's impossible. Think about how much money governments are still investing in military resources and operations, and imagine if that money was invested in public services, social policies for intercultural integration, for example, health and education system. Imagine that. So the resources are there. They only have to be used and distributed in a radically different way. And in order to understand this vision, we must finally start to promote a new criteria of social development. We call this new criteria the ethics of freedom. I was saying that the resources are there and they have to be distributed in a very different way, okay? But to understand this type of vision, this type of possibility of change, we need to promote a new criteria for a social development. We are calling this new criteria ethics of freedom, which means liberation from pain and suffering for all human beings, not only for few, okay? And to be consistent with this type of ethics, individuals must start to rethink their own personal priorities and embrace a different type of lifestyle, which is centered on understanding that there is no future for a few if there's no future for all. So ethics of freedom means taking an active stand against every form of violence, discrimination, and privileges, and being ready to lead a life that is coherent and consistent with these principles. I think this is the only way out to overcome injustice.
Let's move on to artificial intelligence. Is there a threat from AI?
Well, very huge point also this. Well, if you think about it, since the beginning of humanity, technology has always been used in favor or against human development. For example, a stone could be used as a tool to save time and improve the quality of life, or to kill another human being. So, artificial intelligence, like every tool, depends on the criteria that is applied to use it. It could be both used to speed up the development of knowledge, research, etc., which would be a positive thing, or as a tool to manipulate information, create fake news, or even to weaken even more the intellectual skills of people, when instead of making a minimum intellectual effort, they rely on artificial intelligence as a crutch for their lazy and rusty intellect. These trends we can already observe, actually. So once again, nothing is necessarily good or bad in itself, okay? So we should try to overcome the polarization that nowadays is applied to each and every topic. No? Let's instead maybe reflect on the criteria that should regulate the use of technology. No? And once again, maybe we can imagine what would happen if we applied the ethics of freedom, as we said before, which is overcoming pain and suffering for all human beings, as a parameter to evaluate what is positive and what is negative in technology. So nowadays, the use of artificial intelligence is already violent, I think, because big corporations are already using it to figure out how to increase their profits through predictive learning and other things applied to marketing. Not to talk about the political manipulation of media and information, of course.
That's a good point. But I guess human being created AI, right?
Yes,
So
exactly.
I think AI won't be wiser than human being. It's just I can't imagine how AI can be in control and be violent towards human if it's just not logical. Like human created AI, he's smarter, he can control AI, right?
Yeah, but think about who are the humans who are able to really control AI?
That's the next question, right?
That is the problem, right? Who is controlling AI? Actually, AI was created by engineers who definitely had a very big intelligence, no, and skills in that, but paid by corporations who have certain type of interests, okay? And therefore, the access of the use of AI and the application of AI is depending on those type of interests nowadays, right? So let's think about maybe some engineers or big brains can understand the functioning of AI. Definitely not the masses of people. No? The masses of people will only suffer from the use that is done of AI.
Right. Well, speaking about violence, hostility, does human hostility originate in childhood?
Hostility, you mean violence, aggression?
Yes,
this type
hostility,
of behaviors.
violence, aggression, that's all similar.
Well, I personally don't believe that aggression and violence are rooted in human beings. Because if you think about it, aggression is normally a behavior that is triggered by negative emotions, such as fear, anger, possessions, okay? And of course, behaviors can be educated, right? But probably first of all, it's necessary to educate children to emotional management, if this is so. So if the emotions are the trigger of the behavior, including the violent ones, the key point is the emotional management. Learning maybe to recognize the different emotions and how to navigate them and quickly convert negative emotions in order to gain a greater balance and stability. Imagine if the education was based on that as well. No? Moreover, I think it's necessary to teach how to be empathetic towards others by learning how to feel the pain and suffering that is produced in the other person. No? So since children are normally very sensitive emotionally, then it's certainly possible to grow empathetic if they are properly guided and stimulated in that direction. So I think all of this should be part of the basic education, but of course it should be taught to the families as well, since children tend to absorb the emotions and behaviors from the closest references that they have, of course, no? So if their references is the family environment, they will be affected by the models that are expressed there.
That's only on one hand if hostility originate in childhood, but on the other hand, it could be the case of trauma.
Yes, of course. But if you think about the mechanism, the minimum psychological mechanism, you know that traumas actually affect certain emotions that are connected to certain situations, okay? So if there is no emotional education in terms of learning how to navigate the emotions and work with them since a young age, you have no hope that adults will be able to, overcome and choose different type of responses in front of life situations, right? There's no way. So once again, I think it goes back to the emotional educations and the environmental possibilities that individuals have to work on this. No? Anyway, if you think about it, you would not be effective anyway if this type of education is only provided in the school environment. And maybe children have completely opposite references in their homes and families. No? Not to speak about the examples that they take from the media, social media, TV series, movies, video games. All these inputs, of course, affect the psychological functionings.
Right.
So
how can we develop a citizen who values human life above all else?
through educational system. But educational systems involves all these things that we're talking about. It's not only what happens in school, okay? It involves family environment, also the social environment and everything. So actually, nowadays it's extremely difficult to give an alternative educational model to a child. No? The best we can do is to try to balance a little bit all the negative influences that happen from society, no? And teach kids to learn to recognize and work on their emotions, just like we teach them how they have to brush their teeth. That should be the basic hygiene, okay?
Yes, that's a good point. Good thought. That's what we should do. How to, yes, speaking about the traumas, yeah, in our lives, I think most of the people have them in certain way.
Yeah.
How do you perceive the work of modern psychologists?
Well, I think that it's always a mistake to generalize, okay? But I can observe that there are a lot of problems in that regard. No? For example, let's try to define the purpose of psychology, okay? To say the least, we could assume that psychology has the function of helping to overcome mental suffering in human beings, right? No? So whatever use of psychology that diverts from these ethics is manipulative, in my opinion. Okay. We can see how much nowadays psychology is instead used for different purposes, like advertising, marketing, corporate interests. And therefore, once again, the problem is not the tool, but the purpose of its use, just like with technology. No? So even when the ethics of psychologists are still intact, we can observe a huge gap between the theoretical knowledge and the actual direct experience of those tools and theories. So, for example, I've been cooperating for years with the students of psychology from different countries. And I noticed that they tend to store a huge amount of information, but they don't learn at all how to be minimally insightful or capable of managing their own psychological issues. So we can see, for example, graduates or even people with PhDs who struggle to connect empathetically with other people or struggle to manage their own emotional problems, right? But they have the aspiration to be able to help others to overcome the same problems. And that is pretty absurd, right? It's weird. So maybe the most problematic trend that we can observe is, at best, good psychologists provide the tools and support that are useful for self-knowledge, okay, to understand what is the problem that the person is facing and where the problem is rooted. This is the best that I can see them doing, no? Helping in the self-knowledge part. But very few times they also provide their patients tools of self-transformation in order to transform emotional states or behavioral patterns. No? So this often results in a never-ending introspection, okay, like delving into what is the root of my problem, why am I like this, what happened, and never working on the real change of pattern, right, and behaviors. So this type of introspection is not associated with the real work of self-transformation. So we can say that oftentimes the work of psychologists is partially beneficial, but it's incomplete. It's as beneficial, for example, as a plumber, right, that helps you figure out what is the problem with your broken shower, for example. No? But he never starts to help fixing it, actually, right? You get my point. So you keep meeting the plumber over and over and over, and he helps you understand until the ultimate detail of the problem of your shower. For example, the hair is clogging the draining, the water leak, the mold on the wall, whatever, but it's never helping to fix it. So knowing the root of the problem is not enough to fix the problem. So this is what I think is a real important point that is limiting the benefit of psychology nowadays. So in order to overcome mental suffering, it's necessary to provide a clear methodology that is not useful only as a self-knowledge, but it's also used as a real practice on the self. to transform. And then it has to be implemented in daily life. It's common sense, I think. So
I believe that there's a lot of good, really professional psychologists today, and they're really being effective and helping people. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. But I think that this part, the part of the practices that people have to use to transform their behaviors is still lacking in many cases. I'm not saying in all cases. No, but in many cases it is.
I know. Anyway, it's hard work on yourself. Let's discuss about social media. What attributes should modern journalists have, in your opinion?
Oh, it's very important. As journalists have a crucial role in this moment, I think. I'm not a journalist, of course, but I think it's a very complicated task because it's so easy to get lost in the flood of manipulative information that is fed through the traditional media and also the social media. So the misuse of technology in this field makes it even harder to tell the difference between facts and fiction. Therefore, I think that in order to provide good information, it takes a huge effort of fact-checking, research, direct observation, if possible, no? And of course, also quoting the sources is essential. And I'm saying that as a reader, as a viewer, not as a journalist, of course. I can see, honestly, also an even more complex problem. So if you want, I would be happy to share it, which is related to this, no? Probably we could assume that the mission of a journalist is to provide the tools to the reader or viewer to form an opinion, right? So it should be helpful to form an opinion for people, right? So one thing is accumulating data and facts, no? Another thing is organizing this data into a narrative, which is unavoidable when it comes to describing an event, no? So I don't think that journalism has ever been only about the naked description of the facts, no? Because that would not be accurate anyway, and the observation of a phenomena is never really complete. And anyways, it would be insufficient to provide elements to form an opinion about something. For example, if you see an accident on the road, okay, and you need to write a report about it, what you will write is what you observed from one specific angle, maybe, mixed with a number of details that you deduce from that observation. But where are your deductions? They're in your head, right? In the way you look at the event, correct? So what we're saying here, if this is true, it's really uncomfortable because it forces us to question what we believe that reality is, okay? Because the experience of something is always the result of a direct observation from an angle with the addition of memory and imagination that help us to complete the incomplete data. So, besides these phenomenological implications, but how can this be helpful for a good journalist? I think that, to say the least, it's useful to be aware that we are constantly affecting the narration of events with our own look, okay? So we should be careful in separating the direct observation from the interpretation that we give. In that way, maybe we can hope to provide less biased information to the audience and put them in a better condition to form their opinion, if they're not too lazy to think critically, right? But there is also another problem that we need to take into account: the tremendous psychological trend towards polarization. right? That makes it even more difficult to stick to facts, because people are more prone to take sides even before forming a personal opinion. And that's how information turns into propaganda, for example. From one side or another, doesn't matter. That happens from all sides. And people stick to the information that is fed by the side they are choosing, knowingly or unknowingly. So there's this problem with critical thinking as well. I don't know if you agree, because you are in this field much more than I am.
Yeah, I think you're right. In some point, it's really, it's a tough one, tough question, because we can talk about it, I think, in hours.
Yeah.
It's really a wide topic to discuss. But you made your point clear, and it's a good point. In the end of our conversation, my favorite question, is there actually freedom of speech?
Oh, wow. I guess that honestly it depends very much on the situation. It's obvious that certain countries are undeniably more, more authoritarian when it comes to censorship, for example. But thankfully, technology is also used in a positive way, finding ways around it, around this type of censorship that is happening, right? And so in the places where social media can be used with less filtering, still there is a certain limitation of freedom of speech that comes from the official media that manipulate or filter opinions and informations. So social media themselves are clearly a tool of thought control, because one might think that they are unfiltered, but matter of fact, they are a lot. So once again, it all goes back to the use that people make of it. No? As always, people are directly responsible also for the lack of interest towards urgent and important matters that concern our future as humanity, right? Oftentimes.
I hate to interrupt, but what does freedom of speech means to you?
To me, it means the freedom to express the opinions that result from a critical thinking. What I'm questioning is the critical thinking now, because even in the places where freedom of speech is granted, there is a lack of critical thinking. For example, just take a look at the trending topics on the social media and the use that the majority of people make of social media. No? You will quickly see which use people make of their so-called freedom of speech. No? They're engaged in food porn, fashion, pets, music hits, sports, whatever. And of course, the algorithms only serve the purpose to keep people engaged in social media and sell adverts. So it's like a network that traps people in that. And what I'm saying is the responsibility is also from people's side. So, of course, freedom of speech is limited in various measures, but the worst problem is the use that people make of their freedom that is left to them. No? So I think this is a huge problem. Basically, the main problem is the lack of intelligence to formulate opinions that are based on critical thinking. And of course, also the lack of empathy to be able to understand that we can't disengage from the future of humanity and the planet by entertaining ourselves with all the crap that is fed by social media, of course. So it's two-sided problem.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for your answers. They're really great. I think it was really a good conversation. I wish you luck with your meetings on Alpha community, and you're really doing well. I wish you good luck.
Thank you, Daria. Thanks again for the depth and importance of these questions. and the amazing work that you're doing with Point News. So I hope we can keep cooperating more and more further.
Yes, it's my pleasure. Have a good day.